Hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, a Microsoft Ignite recap presented by our Chief Solutions Officer, Peter Ward. My name is Kayla Elise. I'm the Marketing Manager here at MOQdigital, so I'll be your moderator for today, so you may hear my voice pop in from time to time. The question and answer box is open, so please feel free to pop any questions into the box and we'll answer them throughout. Anything we don't get to today will be answered at the end of the presentation, or someone will reach out to you directly. And the slides from today's presentation will be emailed to you after the presentation, so you will receive those along with any other resources that we mentioned today. So I'll hand over now to Peter to get us started.
Well, hi everyone, welcome along to today's webinar. What we're going to do in today's webinar is do a recap on all the major announcements that were made at the Microsoft Ignite conference earlier in the month. For those that aren't aware, the Microsoft Ignite conference is really where all of the announcements for developers as well as IT professionals are made. And if you've seen the book of news that was released as part of this event, you'll see that there were hundreds and hundreds of announcements that have been made. What we've done in this session today is really recap what we think and distill that down to what are the most important top 10 things that as IT professionals and leaders inside of your business that you really need to be thinking about as we start to the transition forward. So for those that haven't heard of MOQdigital before, we're really Australia's leader in helping organisations accelerate digital transformation. And my name's Peter Ward, the Chief Solution Officer there. Feel free to ask any questions as we go through this session, because really we want to make sure that you get value out of this session to understand how all of these key technology announcements can help you accelerate your own digital transformation journey wherever you might be directly inside of that. So MOQdigital is 100% Microsoft focused with over 12 gold competencies and advanced specializations in a number of areas there. So what I really want to then make that's important for us today is understand what are the IT priorities that organizations are facing. And these are really what underpins what we're going to be covering in today's webinar. As we move through that post-pandemic phase and still in that pandemic, depending on where we are in the world today, one of the biggest challenges that are facing organisations today is how we go about balancing remote and in-work person operations. How do we create that engagement and that sense of belonging when some people are working remotely, some people are working from an office, and ensuring that we're able to then get the maximum value out of our IT investments to be able to enable that immersive experience and ensure that we have inclusion across everyone inside of the business. The other major driving factor that we've got, and this is something that is really starting to gain momentum with the adoption of RPA and other technologies inside of the marketplace, is the ability for us to accelerate automation in decision making there. And you'll see throughout today's presentation, a lot of this is coming through the progression of where we are from a coding perspective. If we think about where we would code with intent and allow the code to then go and then undertake based off the business processes. With where we are now with advancements in AI and machine learning, it's really making this intelligent decision making something that's no longer science fiction, but where data then starts to make decisions for us, which then continues to then improve business processes automatically there. But it also means that we can streamline and automate many of then the manual processes that people would have to do inside of their business to be able to then allow them to be more efficient and move them up the value chain inside of the organisation. Whenever we talk about digital transformation, that core nucleus and the heart and soul of any digital transformation is the customer. The ability to personalise the experience and make the technology be able to then create individual experiences so that we can actually not only have 6 or 7 defined personas, but individual defined personas for every one of our customers there, meaning that we can then provide the right services at the right time at the right price in order to be able to satisfy their individual needs. And obviously as part of that, provide a better outcome and increase the engagement level we have with them. And that ties very closely into the personalised communication. So we've also been subject to that with the pray and spray emails that we might have received from individual organisations, or not being able to communicate effectively with them. That personalised communication means that we can then start to leverage things like chatbots and other capability to meet the customer when they want to communicate and how they want to communicate, and be able to continue to do that in an efficient manner, which also drives the reduction of cost from an operations perspective as well. And finally, that priority that we're seeing working with organisations is that ever increasing emphasis on data and cybersecurity. That increase in posture is driven by not only external actors, but it's also driven by internal staff as well. So really thinking about making sure that all of our security priorities are based on the concept of zero trust. So making sure that that is replicated through every part of our technology ecosystem and our technology landscape that we have there. But when we think about digital transformation, often it's seen as a buzzword. You can't go and pick up any of the IT press today or any of the writings from any of the analyst community without seeing this word digital transformation. However, when I think about digital transformation, what that really means to me is how we're able to go and leverage our technology investments that we've made in order to be able to streamline and make business process better. This ongoing search for efficiency is not something new. Continual business process improvement is something that we've always wanted to be able to achieve from an aspirational standpoint. What's different now is that technology allows us to be able to rapidly transform that. We can actually have access to more data than we've ever had before in order to accelerate and increase that continual feedback loop that we can continue to build on. The reality is digital transformation is not a destination. Digital transformation is a journey. It's a continual evolution that we need to go on as our organisations continue to then be disrupted from external threats, but also as we be able to then enhance and harness new capability inside of our organisations. So when we think about digital transformation, it's really made up of four main key components here. How we go about transforming products. So how do we go and take that continual feedback loop from our customers, be able to understand how they're utilising them from a data perspective, and then once we've identified that, being able to feed that back in and continue to A/B test all of our products and grow the ability there. Optimize operations. We're always looking for efficiency in business. So, rather than having manual processes, how do we go about digitizing that? Whether that digitization is simply a form to make it easier for people to communicate, or whether that digitization and the optimization of operations is introducing new line of business capability or new channels through e-commerce or other omni-channel type operations there to enable us to then be able to be more efficient and do more with less. And what digital transformation allows us to do is really focus on being able to do more with less by moving resources from one area to another. And there's no organisation on the planet that has infinite resources. So this focus on then how we can go about innovating and growing our business becomes key to enable us to do more with less. One of the other parts of our digital transformation is how we go about empowering our employees. How do we give them the right data at the right time to make the right decisions to be able to continue to accelerate our business growth, which feeds into enhancing that ongoing customer experience there. So as we walk through today's session, what we've done is distilled down those key announcements that were made at Microsoft Ignite and tie them back to how you can then go and utilize this technology to then underpin the digital transformation that's occurring across the organization. But when we think about technology today, the technology intensity is a term you'll start to hear used more and more throughout the industry there. And that technology intensity is underpinned by 5 key core components. And if you look at then the ethos that the Microsoft Cloud has, it's underpinned by each of these. And these really become key core pillars in the way that we go about delivering cloud technology and the ability of how we go about delivering services to customers today. Really, when we start to think about cloud computing, it really starts to provide ubiquitous and decentralized computing. And that ubiquity is really that we have access to more compute resources than we've ever had previously at any time in the past. If you think about the traditional Moore's law, the limiting factor was simply how many cores and how fast that we could make the CPU. We now have access to more CPU cycles than ever before, and that's continuing to grow on a day-by-day basis there. The access to technology is no longer, though, needing to be centralised. The challenge that we have as an organisation, and the challenge that many other organisations have, is that our compute is actually now more centralised than it's ever been inside of history. Centralised in the hyperscale data centres, or even centralised into our own private data centres. As we start to move forward, there's a need to start to decentralise some of that compute and make that available on the edge, but also then thinking about the sovereignty of those compute resources and the sovereignty of where that data resides as well, which really feeds into then that sovereignty of data and also ambient intelligence. When we think about ambient intelligence, that ambient intelligence is to be able to make decisions where the data resides, rather than having to bring that data back centrally into a central processing and being able to bring that into a central data warehouse or other data hub. It's how do we then make that decision-making process out there directly on the edge, whether that's at a sensor level or whether it's actually in a hub scenario directly with that. The other key part of driving that underlying technology intensity is how do we empower everyone in our organisation to be creators, and how do we create those communities and pockets of centres of excellence to help then support and underpin that. We see that with Power Automate today, and really starting to focus on the citizen developers and empowering everyone inside of the organisation, whether they're a knowledge worker or whether they're a frontline worker, having access to these tools that enable them to be able to then understand business problems, bring their domain expertise and subject matter experts to be able to then deliver technology solutions across the business and move that away from the centralised IT function into the hand of the experts inside of the organisation. The other one is around the economic opportunity for global workforce and the ability for us to then extend and grow across not only our local regions, but also being able to then use technology to remove barriers across every part of the workforce, but every part of the globe as well. IT becomes then our central language there. And if we look at some of the advancements that are being made in Microsoft Teams and translation, language is no longer a barrier for us to be able to then utilise a truly global workforce. And underpinning this is trust by design. So ensuring that whatever services that we provide are underpinned by a level of trust. The last thing we want to do is actually be working with a cloud provider or an IT provider that sells us services on one hand, but then directly competes with us on the other hand as well. So that trust by design is key to everything that we want to think about as we go through and transform our organisations and start to leverage all of this technology capability. So one of the things and the themes that we saw that came directly out of the announcements that were recently made at Ignite was really about the concept of industry clouds. So really often you've heard Microsoft talk about a number of clouds that they've had. You know, that you heard them talk about Azure previously, about Microsoft 365 and Dynamics 365 as well. However, really moving forward, there is one cloud, and that's the Microsoft cloud. And that Microsoft cloud is then underpinned by specific capability. This capability is becoming even more specific than it's ever been in the past with the introduction of 5 industry clouds. We announced 3 of these at Microsoft Ignite. 2 of those were available previously prior to Ignite. What these industry clouds are designed to do is designed to then go and leverage the existing building blocks that are in Azure today, but then being able to underpin those building blocks with specific industry capability, whether that's existing machine learning algorithms in retail that are designed to be able to help solve some of the challenges around just-in-time supply chain and making sure appropriate stock on hand levels are then managed throughout a retail environment, or whether that's a non-profit who's struggling with being able to then effectively engage and get donors to then be and bequeath and be able to then sponsor various different initiatives. So in order to be able to accelerate that adoption, those building blocks have been designed and rolled up with industry-specific IP that can be leveraged, but can also be built on from an individual organisation perspective. So really think about this as industry accelerators that allow you to then take best of breed capability and then build and accelerate directly on that. And MOQdigital is proud of some of the work that we're doing around the industry verticals to enable this acceleration, to not only enable cloud adoption, but also be able to accelerate the vision that organisations have of being able to leverage this specific capability directly as well. So if we then look at one of the first announcements that was made around Microsoft Ignite, one of the major features and the major announcements was the continual improvement and the continual feature set that was introduced inside of Microsoft Teams. If anyone's heard any of the commentary that Satya Nadella has provided around Microsoft Teams is really becoming the new operating system for organisations. It's that single pane of glass that every experience from a collaboration or application perspective is now starting to be surfaced directly through that. We now have the ability to be able to embed applications directly inside of Teams. Those applications are not just inside of the Teams workspace, but also then can be native into individual Teams experiences, such as a meeting or directly inside of a webinar such as this as well. So some of the work that MOQdigital is already doing for customers is, for example, frontline nursing staff, enabling them to be able to then do shift handovers inside of Teams and embed an application that connects directly with their care management system, ensuring the accuracy of data that's captured as the handover and handoff occurs to those frontline field workers directly inside of that there. But it's not just limited to IT solutions as well. With Power Apps natively, anyone in the organisation can go and create their own workflow or own process and be able to embed that directly inside of the Teams experience as well. What we've also seen from an announcement perspective is that continuation to be able to create a ubiquitous and seamless experience no matter how people are interacting. Whether that's somebody in a Teams room, inside of a conference room, in a corporate head office, being able to then connect with a mobile field worker, being able to connect with somebody that's working from their spare bedroom. That experience means that they have a consistent view and a consistent engagement no matter where they're connecting directly from. But also as part of the announcements we made at Microsoft Ignite is really breaking down those boundaries and allowing us to collaborate easily across any organisation. The ability to take that existing Teams experience and that existing Teams channel and not only collaborate with our internal staff, but also be able to then collaborate with external stakeholders as well directly across that. So those experiences then continuing to then grow, but it's not only from a growth of experience perspective, it's also then continuing to ensure that underlying security posture. So now you'll find by default that all the secure Teams channels are all encrypted directly by default, allowing us to then reimagine then how we go about using Teams in any experience that we might have and truly create a hybrid workforce that anyone can then easily collaborate directly with. Now, one of the next announcements is something that's really exciting and really starts to bring together data analytics, machine learning, as well as cognitive services into one single pane of glass from a management perspective there. And that's a product that's known as Azure Perception. And really that's the ability for us to be able to then go and sense what's happening directly on the edge, know what to do, and then being able to act directly on that. Now that might be in a retail scenario there where there's a camera that's focused on a particular shelf, understanding what the ideal replenishment levels is directly for that stock, knowing based on that algorithm to then go and then automatically go and place an order with a retail management system. In a manufacturing scenario, it could be that it's a camera that's then looking at bottles on a production line that then detects a foreign element that's inside of a bottle there, and then once again acts and pushes that bottle down a defect line rather than being put in a box and sent directly out to a customer. So Azure Percept is based on the three main sensors that we have, and that's the sensors of sight, the sensors of hearing, as well as also then the sense of actually knowing what to do then. So what we're seeing is the ability to go and use cameras, the ability to use image detection, tie that directly back into our cognitive services capability to then be able to then process that. So really taking the power of artificial intelligence, putting that on a robust device that's designed to be in the field. So really we call that the concept of silicon to service. So being able to go and take hardware, embedding a service specifically on that piece of silicon, and then being able to then secure that, but doing all of that then by one central location with our standard Azure management pane, allowing us to then be able to then leverage and deliver real-time capability. So if we then continue to move forward, you'll see that a lot of the announcements are really starting to be underpinned by data. And you've often probably heard the terminology of data being the new oil. The fact that we're in, if you think about the second industrial revolution and what powered that, the reason that data is termed as the new oil is without oil, none of the machines and manufacturing processes, the introduction of the commercialization of the loom would ever have happened to be able to then underpin and drive that industrial revolution. What we're seeing now is in this third revolution is around digital transformation, is without data, nothing underpins and can drive that capability. So some of the announcements that have been made is being able to then make it very easy to be able to then go and consume these services from a data and AI perspective there. So some of these are pathways that enable us to then move off our existing legacy data warehouse platforms. So if those data warehouse platforms are being run on-prem, or those data warehouse platforms are being run in competitive environments there, it's now very easy for us to then go and take that data and AI capability with Azure Synapse pathway that allows us to then go and accelerate that migration from our traditional environments into Azure Synapse Analytics. And for those that aren't familiar with Azure Synapse Analytics, it's the scalable data analytics warehouse that's inside of Azure that allows us to truly have a limitless experience no matter how much data that we're consuming. As the continual volume, variety and velocity of data continues to increase, it's designed to provide us the capability to be able to deal with that at any scale. But one of the challenges that we often have around data is simply just understanding that data. How do we democratize that data so that everybody has insights and understands what that data means and how to leverage that data effectively? And one of the challenges that organisations have is underpinned by this concept of data governance. And that data governance is really underpinned by understanding the tribal knowledge about the data, but also the data lineage and the heritage of that data. So where did that data originate from? What's happened to that data along the way? So all the way from source all the way through to report. So with Azure Purview, what that allows us to then do is capture that tribal knowledge in a central data catalog that all of our data custodians can continue to then add to and develop value on, rather than having a traditional data dictionary that's out of date and sits on somebody's shelf and doesn't add a lot of value. It allows that continual collaboration to understand what data means, but also allow subject matter experts to enhance and add to that over time, meaning that when somebody consumes that data from a data visualization tool such as Power BI, they can understand and see what that particular data artifact really means to then remove the decision-making challenges of people reporting on the wrong data at the wrong time, but also easily enabling them to understand, well, where was the system of record for that data? Where was it sourced from inside of the organisation, and understand that true pathway there. The other key capability is around bringing AI to everybody inside of the organisation. So enabling that democratization with Azure Cognitive Services, bringing that through not only in the capability that we have inside of our traditional data services, but also surfacing that directly inside of the Power Platform, meaning that anybody inside of the organisation that can start to leverage that and make decisions inside of those line of business applications. And finally, that underlying business transformation. So by enabling all of that capability in one single pane of glass ensures that organisations can then readily go and adopt and take advantage of that capability. And I think one of the most exciting things that we're seeing with customers over the last 12 months is the adoption of the Power Platform. So Power Platform moving, that continual low code experience, enabling anyone in the organisation to transform solutions rapidly and easily. But one of the things that they often say, for those that are Star Wars fans, is with comes great power becomes great responsibility. And one of the things about the Power Platform is often it's been termed as Access 2.0, that proliferation of code that's uncontrolled, that shadow IT that we often see inside of organisations. Power Platform provides that capability for organisations to be able to then know with confidence that they can enable their knowledge workers to use a low-code platform to develop applications, but have all of the rigour and governance around that and controls to ensure that the appropriate services are being used, but also understand what's happening and how they're being consumed there. Almost like bumper bowling, where you're able to then go and take the bumpers up, and as long as the bowling ball's thrown down between those lanes, you know that you're going to get a consistent outcome with that every single time. And I think what we're seeing now with Power Automate is the ability to then introduce process automation into manual processing that needs to be done. I sort of cast my mind back and it almost feels like, what's old is new again. It's almost like the macros that we had to be able to record actions natively inside of Windows 3.11. I remember one of my first jobs when I started working inside of a service desk environment where all of a sudden there was a lot of alerts coming and we got flooded with 20,000 tickets inside of our IT service management system, needing to be able to then go and record the actions rather than manually having to close every single ticket, recording that macro to then process and close all of those tickets by recording that. And that's really what Power Automate Desktop does, is brings the ability for us to record repetitive actions and then be able to play that directly back. Knowing that the underlying technology that Power Automate is built on is leveraging then the Logic Apps capability that's designed to be able to then process at robust and industrial scale. So one of the other announcements that was made at Ignite is around Microsoft Power FX. Now, Power FX is probably more of a concept and a view about where Microsoft is going to really start to have a common formula language across all of the products that we have across our ecosystem. Rather than having different languages inside of Power BI and different languages inside of Excel and different languages inside of other tooling, it allows us to then go and create a central formula repository. So if we have a way of calculating net present value or other complex calculations, we can create them once and share those across all of the different application experiences that we have inside of the organisation as well. We've spoken about some of the governance and the bumper bowling analogy that I have that the Power Platform provides. But I think the other key thing around that is when we think about the Power Estate, it's not only our Power Automate and Power Apps, but one of the key tenets of that is Power BI and the ability to be able to then take data and visually make that available to anyone inside of the organisation by rolling up those complex data sets into bite-sized chunks that everyone can consume. So one of the announcements that was made at Microsoft Ignite is that Power BI Premium is now being made on a per user basis. So rather than having to actually have a dedicated Power BI BI premium resource, it's now available on a per user basis, the same way that Power BI Pro is licensed directly as well. And finally, the AI capability that we're continuing to bring through our Power Virtual Agents there, enabling us to be able to then communicate with our customers in a seamless way with a native chatbot style experience that makes everything from a line of business process enabled to everybody.
We'll just do some questions if that's okay, Peter. We've had a few come through. The first one is, what is Azure Purview? So we've obviously got some resources that we can send out post this webinar, but do you want to give us a bit of a kind of 30-second download on that one?
Yeah, so Azure Purview is a data governance tool inside of Azure today. It allows you to then be able to take data out of any source as it's being ingested through your ADF pipelines and automatically start to catalog that and share that with data custodians who can then go and add additional tribal knowledge and start to describe the data directly with that. So it's a native service that's available directly inside of Azure today. It extends on some of the existing investments from the Azure Data Catalog and extends and builds on that. But as Kayla said, we've got on our YouTube channel a webinar that one of my colleagues, Arp, recently produced, as well as a number of other artifacts around ebooks and how-to guides that will help you get up to speed, because we see that that's key to underpin the challenges of data governance around data lineage and data cataloging.
Great, thanks for that. And the second question is, Microsoft 365 for business users seems vast and they don't know what they don't know. So staff are interested in use cases. How have others used different apps, and do you have any examples of use cases?
Yeah, look, that's a really good question. And look, I often describe not only Azure, but also Microsoft 365 as a little bit of a Swiss Army knife. There's lots of different tools that you can use, but it's understanding the right tool to use for the right job. One of the things that we've seen work really well is around the adoption and change management piece in organisations, and that's establishing that centre of excellence to help educate and empower everyone in the organisation to unlock the value. So even simple things that people aren't aware of often inside of Microsoft 365 is things like the find time application to enable people to easily then agree on a meeting time on people across organisations, or even the Microsoft Bookings app as well, that allows you then to be able to create individual booking experiences directly inside of that. So, you know, that championing and change from a change management perspective and setting up that ongoing centre of excellence we've seen as key to help unlock the value that all of these tool sets have and ensure that the right tool is being used for the right job.
Thanks, Peter. That's all the questions so far, so let's keep going.
Fantastic. So if you do have any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat window. We'll certainly make sure that we get to those as we go through the session. So one of the other key features we're seeing is the extension of Dynamics 365. Now, Dynamics 365 is really around Dynamics CE, and the customer experience there is really key to enable us to understand the customer journey. But it's the extending and building of that, so natively interfacing that directly with Teams, for example, so that when we're communicating with a customer who might exist inside a CRM, we can continue that experience in a way that makes sense directly for them. But one of the other things that underpins Dynamics 365 is the F&O investments with finance and operations, as well as Business Central, and the key ERP components that starts to provide for organisations. One of the things, talking to many organisations over the last 12 months off the back of the pandemic, is really the resilience in supply chain. So understanding where there's weaknesses in that supply chain, whether that's because people aren't able to produce toilet paper quick enough, or whether that's provided by other challenges that the supply chain has, understanding where that resilience is, especially as we start to move to more and more sovereign capability as well, especially around key resources that are needed to underpin our move forward post-pandemic as well. So really those ongoing enhancements are really driven by that customer being at the central nucleus for us inside of the organisation, and the ability for us to extend that customer reach beyond the products and extend that into every interaction that we have, no matter what that exists, whether that's natively in CRM or through other applications that interface directly inside of CRM as well. Now, one of the things we realised working with customers, and that Microsoft has certainly realised as well, is that we don't actually live in a homogeneous environment. Organisations are looking to de-risk their cloud migration by having multiple clouds potentially, or a hybrid as well as a hyperscale cloud that they then utilise. So utilising some services in a cloud other than Azure and services directly inside of Azure. The challenge that starts to provide is really then having a single pane of glass that enables you to then be able to then manage all of those different resources, no matter where they sit inside of the organisation. With Azure Arc, it provides a central management plane that allows you to then, if you're running then workload in AWS, or if you're running workload in your on-prem environment or public cloud provider or private cloud provider, that you're able to then control all of those resources from one location. That is actually extending and continuing to grow with the Azure Data Services as well. So what that means is some of the hyperscale capability that's available today with SQL MI or SQL Managed Instance, as well as Postgres hyperscale, not only can natively run inside of your Azure environment, but through leveraging Azure Arc, it allows you to take that cloud capability and bring that on-prem today, running inside of a container. And the Kubernetes experience is super important for this, because Kubernetes managed by Azure Arc is fully conformant with the cloud native Kubernetes and container foundation, meaning that you have true portability to be able to then move workload not only between cloud providers, but also be able to move workload from cloud on-prem and vice versa directly with ease. So really this starts to mean that you can then go and run any of your capability anywhere there, but provide a single management view that enhances that experience for you to be able to then control that. So rather than having to have multiple skills and multiple technologies and people certified across different cloud providers, Azure Arc provides a solution that enables you to then control that workload no matter where that is running today. So some super exciting announcements that are coming around there. But one of the things around that we're talking to all of our customers about today is one of the technologies of the future is really AKS and Kubernetes, and extending and building that capability directly with those customers is something that we've been doing a lot of work of late, and we'd love to chat to you further about any of that capability if you'd like to be able to explore it in further detail. So we've talked about security a lot, but really security is top of mind for any organisation today. But that security is really based up of a number of components there. One of the keys is really starting with identity. Identity is really the starting point for any conversation around to security today. So by adopting a zero trust strategy, it's not a destination, it's not a journey, it's something that you need to underpin with every component inside of the organisation. So every single step that you take means that you're getting closer and closer to being more secure. So in today's world, with those disappearing corporate network perimeters, where it's no longer just people working in a physical office, identity is often the first line of defence. While Zero Trust journey will be unique for every single organisation, really it's about then starting with a strong cloud identity foundation and building on those fundamentals. And one of the things we're seeing adopted by more and more organisations, including MOQdigital, is passwordless authentication. So removing that as an attack vector totally. It's now underpinned and supported by also Azure AD conditional access. but also Azure AT verifiable credentials. That means that we're able to then go and create one-time usage passwords for the resetting directly as well. But one of the other things that underpins that zero trust is really starting to think about the assumed breach. Almost a thinking that, it's not only if we're going to be breached, but we're probably already breached, and how do we go about protecting that as part of the zero touch principles. So this really begins with integrated solutions that allow you to focus on what matters by really delivering visibility across all of the platforms that you're running inside of your data centers and also across your clouds. So this is really delivered by Azure Sentinel. So delivering that SIEM capability that then integrates then with real-time notification and real-time event processing that allows us to then rapidly respond to that. The other key component, though, there of this holistic approach is not just that best of breed SIEM, but also then leveraging the extended detection and response tooling that allow you to then understand your current posture, understand how to be able to protect your environment, but more importantly, also then how to respond to an incident directly as well. So thinking about that. Compliance also is one of the key pieces, is not only thinking about then compliance external to the organisation, but also compliance inside of the organisation. So when we think about zero trust, it's not just protecting against those external threats, but also then thinking about inside out. That compliance is about managing risk related to data. And some of the enhancements that have been made directly inside of that is now with the Microsoft 365 inside risk management analytics. That allows us to then run an audit across our environment and understand where our internal risk directly is. But it also feeds into some of the announcements that were made around Azure Purview as well, which provides us then with a central Microsoft protection capability, enabling you to then have sensitivity labels and understanding where that data is then being consumed inside of the organisation, which means that things like HIPAA and SOX compliance and even GDPR is easier than ever for organisations to be able to achieve by leveraging that capability. Now, one of the big hype points that was announced at Microsoft Ignite was Microsoft Mesh. Now, Microsoft Mesh is really an experience that allows us to then create a mixed reality, not only internal to the organisation, but external to the organisation as well. It builds on some of the work with HoloLens that it's hard to believe that was only released 12 months ago. But what it does is provides us then a digital experience that's very much like Minority Report and some of the other sci-fi videos, where we're able to then truly actually interact in a native manner. Whether that's then my sister who lives over in the UK being able to join her birthday party and then being able to then immerse myself as if I was directly with her without any screen being involved directly at all. But the other thing about the Microsoft Mesh experience is it really starts to enable us to then reimagine how we go and deliver remote services. Whether that's then a specialist medical provider who's able to then go and provide expertise to someone in Uganda or another developing nation. So being able to see exactly what they're seeing, interfacing directly with Microsoft Mesh, Microsoft Teams, but also then the CRM capability as well that allows that operation to then be done, thousands of kilometres away. Or whether that's a subject matter expert that needs to go and replace a wind turbine in a high risk and dangerous area, that we're able to then be able to visualize that experience and really feed into the concept of a digital twin and being able to then overlay then different scenarios and seeing how that experience provides. But one of the capabilities of Microsoft Mesh is not only will it run on a Microsoft-based device, but it's also designed to run across an entire ecosystem. So meaning you can then leverage any of your existing virtual reality headsets. It might be Oculus or other providers there, but also be able to deliver that capability directly to a mobile or tablet experience where anyone then sits to provide. If you haven't watched the demonstration of Microsoft Mesh, I highly recommend that you take the time to spend that 10 minutes and think about then how you can then go and reimagine the way that you deliver services, not only to your internal stakeholders, but also how you engage your customers as well through a modern collaborative experience with that. One of the things we hear organisations have challenges with is how do they go about accelerating that digital transformation journey? In the last 45 minutes or so, we've really distilled some of those key initiatives and where we think that organisations are going to start to then gain rapid value out of the announcements that were made out of Microsoft Ignite. But one of the key things that MOQdigital specialises in is helping organisations really truly accelerate the adoption of technology. So what we have on offer is our $50,000 Azure migration offer. That's $50,000 of professional services that are potentially available to you to be able to then enable some of the capability that we've spoken about today, but also be able to then enable many of the other Azure services that we haven't touched on today. So if you'd like to take advantage of that offer, you'll see that we have our URL here. So moqdigital.com/50K Azure funding. We'll share that link out with the post presentation notes to allow you to take advantage of that and be able to then truly then accelerate your own digital transformation journey. So I hope that you've got some value, and this has really started to provide you insight and distilled down all the announcements that were made over the 3 days at Microsoft Ignite, and really started to then provide you insight in how you can then start to truly reimagine and start to then deliver on that tech intensity that we spoke about at the start of the webinar. So what we're now going to do is open the floor to any questions that we might have and cover those directly off there. So thanks again for your time today on the webinar.
Thanks, Peter. We just have one question in the chat box before we end. There's someone wanting to know if there were any announcements made on SQL Server or SharePoint, and any ideas on the future technologies, the future direction of these technologies.
Yeah, great question there. So there are a number of announcements that were made across the Azure Data Services, including SQL Server as well. I think one of the most exciting ones was the one that we touched on around Azure Arc and the ability for us to then go and run Azure SQL Hyperscale with SQL MI on any location. So not just inside of Azure, but able to bring that cloud scale capability to on-prem environments as well. SharePoint's an interesting one, because what we're seeing more and more is that Teams is really starting to provide that modern collaboration capability for organizations today. More and more SharePoint is moving into that intranet style solution with all of the document management and all of the collaboration capability landing directly inside of Teams. So there was a number of announcements that were made directly on that, realizing that all of the Teams capability sits on the existing platform that SharePoint provides as well. So we'll also then, as part of that, provide some URLs to those specific announcements around SQL Server and the modern collaboration experience as well, as part of the post-webinar notes as well. But great question there.
That is pretty much all of our questions. If you do have any specific questions that you would like us to answer, then please reach out to us via the email address that your invitation came from and your sign up came from, and we will do our best to get back to you. Thanks everyone, appreciate your time.